So thank you all for joining our final webinar of the AgResilience Focus Farmer Breakfast webinar series. Today we're going to be covering feeding for the future. So we've got Deb Scammell from Talking Livestock Online who will be giving us a really great presentation in a little while. So this follows on from 3 other webinars that you'll be able to find have been recorded and are online. They are the Foundations for Success, Focus on Finances, and then the art of decision making that we ran last week. Yeah, as I said, following on with this feeding for the future, and it really does make sense to go back and watch all of them in succession because they tie in really nicely with each other, and you can find them on the livestock webinar page on our website or on the Sheep Connect website. All 4 of them will be available there. So I'm Penny Keynes, Project Manager for Livestock SA, the state farming organisation here in SA that represents sheep, cattle and goat producers. This series has really been put together out of a bit of a conversation we've had with a lot of different members, but also talking to our partners around what producers are feeling at the moment and some of the pressures that we're recognising, that we wanted to just be able to help provide some support and guidance for producers at this time, particularly around some of the market and weather forecasts. So we are really grateful for the funding that we've received from the Farm Business Resilience Program through PIRSA and the Commonwealth Government and the Future Drought Fund. And we're really, again, grateful for the great support that we've had of partners, including the Sheep Connect network. We've got Jodie Rosé online, who is here supporting in the background, AgX Alliance, and of course the SA Livestock Consultant. So 3 really great organisations that operate here in South Australia and are around to really support producers. So I'd like to introduce you to Deb Scammell. Deb is a livestock consultant at Talking Livestock. She assists producers with nutrition and production planning in their sheep and beef enterprises. She consults directly with farmers and runs industry courses and projects. Deb Scammell is based in Seven Hill in Clare. Prior to starting her own business, Deb worked in commercial nutrition space and in several different roles, covering technical, sales and national management. Deb has also been involved in sheep genetic programs with DNA, EID technology and extension and sheep research. Deb graduated from Adelaide Uni with a Bachelor of Agriculture Science and Honours in Animal Science, and has studied ruminant nutrition postgrad. So grateful to have Deb here to be able to share all of her fantastic skills with us. But to start the session, Deb, thanks for coming along, but I'll ask you what I've been asking all of our guests. How's things going with your clients, and what is the one piece of advice you've been sharing with them right now?
Yeah, so I guess as you guys are all aware, like there's a lot of probably media as well about just, how much it's drying out. So most of our focus has really been feeding strategies like I'll cover today, how we're going to get through, I guess, till the break of season next year. And then probably just strategically helping them make decisions about which stock they keep and which ones they sell. So yeah, that's probably been what I've been working through most is, if you've got relatively expensive supplementary feed on hand, do we just sell lambs as stores even though the prices are back, just to make space for ewes and sort of the value breeders going forward. But that we'll touch on that later in the webinar, but it's a really different discussion with each producer depending on their situation, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yep, it's certainly a lot of decisions to make.
Yeah. So I'll be just stepping through with you guys. Firstly, just the current season and the feed quality that's out there. So I guess as we talk about supplementary feeding strategies, the most critical part is sort of what's in the paddock and estimating how long it's likely to last. We'll then step through sort of effective supplementation, what's the best value for you guys to use, and I'll go through a bit of a feed budget and who you might be best likely to feed out there when you look at your varying classes of stock that you're holding. So when we look at the current season, I'm not going to dwell on this. I think there's been a lot of information around about the weather systems we've got coming through that are affecting future rainfall. But yeah, I guess the thing I'm looking at this stage is, you know, through the regions in South Australia that I'm assuming most of you guys are from, you know, we've got a pretty low chance of exceeding median rainfall over the next 3 months. So, you know, over summer, I guess we don't expect a lot of pasture growth anyway. So when I'm setting up feed budgets, we're pretty much looking from now on till whenever the break comes through next year, we are going to have that long sort of period of feeding. And I guess when we look out in the paddock, you know, it probably does feel like we're a lot closer to the middle of summer than what we actually are. So, you know, I'm sort of looking at from now on, feed quality starting to deteriorate and having to prop up a fair bit of that with supplementary feeding. So, you know, you can get these long range forecasts. This has come from the BOM, just to give you a bit of an indicator of whether you're likely to have above or below median rainfall. But as you guys know, you know, you can't always hang your hat on this information. It just gives us a bit of an idea that we potentially will be feeding for a reasonable amount of time. So when we look at the current feed situation, we've got this really solid trend that happens across all of our years. So we've got in the middle here, you've got your feed as it's growing. We've got that really high quality feed, which when we look at feed quality, we look at digestibility of the feed. So on the left-hand axis there, we start at 80%. Sorry, there's a typo on that slide at 50. So we start at that 80% digestibility, which gives you really high energy feed. And then as the season goes on, especially once we sort of get to flowering, you can see you've got that sharp decline in feed quality as we sort of come into summer. So where we're sitting now, you know, in a standard spring with later sort of rain, like we experienced last year, you can hold on to feed quality a little bit going through. But due to the dry sort of September we've had, I've found that, you know, a lot of dry pastures probably are already down to that sort of 55% digestibility. So even though it's only the start of November, I feel like feed quality wise, we're really looking at summer feed. Already that it's dried out considerably in some regions. So when we look at, we'll touch on energy requirements for sheep, but it means a lot of your dry pastures are still only sitting around that sort of 7 megajoules of energy per kilo already. And then what we get with feed quality as summer goes on, you're losing about 2% of your digestibility a week, and that's without a rain event. So the positives of a dry summer that we don't get rain on our dry feed, so you don't get as quick a deterioration. But even over time, you'll still lose that 2% sort of digestibility a week. So by the end of summer, you will have lower quality dry feed in the paddock. So what we do when we're looking at supplementary feeding strategies, as I touched on, is we actually need to have a pretty good look at what's out there first. So I find probably a lot of people, you know, panicking, what are we going to feed? How much are we going to need? So my first step is to have a good look at your paddock feed and try and quantify what you're going to have out there. So for some of you guys, it's dry pastures, others it's going to be stubbles. And then we can do a bit of a plan as to how long that feed's likely to last, when we might need to move stock on from paddocks, and whether we do need to look at containment feeding or something to get them off paddocks because of ground cover. So when we look at our stubbles, it's important to quantify the value in those stubbles. So what we start with is looking at the grain quantity in the stubble. So I've listed on the left there sort of the valuable components in a stubble and how they sort of fit. So what we do with grain quantity, and I do this with quite a lot of groups, is basically do a grain count of how many grains in that stubble are within that 0.1 of a metre squared. So that's a 25 by 40 centimetre quadrant. I do the count in, but you can have whatever size if it adds up to 0.1 of a metre squared. But yeah, throwing that quadrant around the paddock, we'll basically just count the grain quantity. I'm pretty sure not many producers do this after I'm not in the paddock with them, or they call me and get me to come back and do a bit of a stubble plan. But my feeling is once you've done some counts, you start to get a feeling as you walk across a paddock how much roughly might be out there. So the quantities I've listed there under grain quantity, that's the number of grain that makes up 100 kilos per hectare. So 28 grains of wheat, 25 barley, 5 peas and 2 beans. And once you get under sort of 50 to 60 kilos per hectare of grain, the sheep actually don't find very much of it. So once you're over that 100 kilos, they can quite comfortably get their sort of 700 grams of grain a day. But obviously, if you're only in that 100 to 200 kilo range, you're not going to get a lot of grazing days off that stubble. So I'll go around and do these stubble counts and work out, that stubble's going to last 15 days, the next one might only last 10. And we do a bit of a feed budget of how long your stubbles are going to last. So, I don't know whether it's unfortunately or fortunately, due to harvesting gear, we probably do find there's a lot less stubbles value than what there has been in the past. So, I find a lot of people saying, oh, we'll be right, we're going to be on stubble soon. But when you actually do a grazing plan, sometimes you can only get sort of, maybe depending on your hectares of stubbles, you might only get 6 or 8 weeks of high quality grazing. And then you start to get into these lower quality feeds underneath. So once all of the grain's gone, we go to those green shoots. The green shoots are about 90% water, 10% dry matter, as they're small. So you imagine a sheep trying to harvest 1.5 kilos of dry matter of these green shoots. That's 15 kilos of actual green shoot they need to consume. So when you look across a paddock, they have to be a lot more mature than those early green shoots before you start to get a lot of energy value out of those. Weeds, I think the same with summer spraying. We just really don't have the value in weeds that we used to have. Back earlier when you used to get a higher quality sort of graze off stubbles. Then we get to flag leaf and header trash. So, this is often, it can start the season at sort of around 7 megajoules of energy. It'll deteriorate over time. So you can get, a little bit of, you can get almost maintenance energy for a mature ewe out of your flag leaf and header trash. But once you get to just your standing straw, we're down to 3 to 4 megajoules of energy in that. You start to get really below maintenance on that sort of paddock, and that's when you need to be moving stock off. So yeah, depending on your class of stock, we work out who's most suitable to graze through those stubble paddocks first as well. But yeah, quantifying value in the stubble, but also time of grazing is critical with your stubble paddocks. When we look at dry pastures, as I said, we're probably starting this season at around that 55% digestibility already. So that means when we talk 55% digestibility, an animal's retaining 55% of the feed, and the other 45% of it's basically going out the back end. The problem with dry pasture as well is we start to get these really high NDF feeds. So NDF's neutral detergent fibre. It's basically the measure of the digestible fibre in that feed. But as feed dries out, it starts to get quite high. And what we find then is when we look at a rumen as the sheep's grazing, it's actually taking a long time for that dry feed to be digested. And it can sort of pull up potential intakes because their rumen's sort of trying to digest the fibre. It's taking a long time, and then they actually don't really go and graze more. Because they're full of that real fibrous feed. So I imagine it like us trying to eat sort of Weet-Bix all day with no milk. Your system's just trying to digest it. It's really dry, really fibrous, and the whole digestive system just slows up. So, we've got that high fibre feed. We've got the quality sitting, in that 55. If you're lucky, you might still be around 60% digestibility. So quite low energy. If you've got a high legume percentage that's dried out in there, you are likely to have slightly better digestibility than if it's just a grass-based pasture. And then the next thing we look at is FOO, which is feed on offer. So we measure that in kilograms of dry matter per hectare. Once most people have a feed on offer target, going into summer, I really like to keep sort of around a tonne or 1,000 kilos of dry matter per hectare on those dry pasture paddocks, because especially when you look at hills feed, that's likely to be where you might be lambing or calving next year. So having that bulk feed means if we get a late break, you've at least still got some cover and bulk on that paddock. But yeah, quality-wise, we're looking at it deteriorating from now on over summer. So the next thing we look at, so as I said, we quantify sort of grazing days based on what's out there and value for the stock. But we also need to look at your ground cover going into summer. So as you guys know, wind erosion, water erosion, taking all the organic matter off the soil, we're probably a bit more aware of that with some of these carbon projects now going on. But we look at with stubbles, 50% ground cover should be your absolute minimum. I'm also seeing, a lot of lentil stubbles, lupin stubbles, your legumes being grown now, bean stubbles. As you guys know, it can be quite fast for you get down to very low ground cover on those sort of paddocks. So even with some quality left there, you have to be very careful about that ground cover. So on a pasture-based system, I'd probably advise 70% being your minimum ground cover, where with stubbles, we sometimes, just due to the interrows, end up going a little bit lower. But having your target for ground cover and having a really good look at those paddocks, and if you're starting to get low, you really need to be moving stock off. The next thing is the feed on offer, as we said. So, on a dry pasture, I look at 1,000 kilos being the minimum, but within your own property, you need to have your own sort of minimum target that you want to graze down to. And what we look at with that also is pasture recovery. So keeping that dry bulk on there means when we do get that break, as I said, you've got that bulk feed still to lamb or calve onto if it's a late break, but also you get much quicker pasture recovery if you've got some cover still on that paddock. And then, I work a lot in the containment feeding space, but we do need to look at potentially containment feeding or supplementing in varying areas if we are running out of ground cover and feed on offer across all of your paddocks over summer. And with a long summer, like it feels like we will be having, sometimes those areas need to be used, where in other seasons you can get away with putting them out in the paddocks. So I'm just going to touch briefly on animal requirements as we go through the presentation. I think when we look at supplementary feeding, we need to be really aware of those differing requirements of an animal. So I've put up for a 60 kilo ewe, and there's a similar trend for a cow. As you basically come into your lambing or calving, you've got that peak energy demand. So we've got here for a 60 kilo ewe, they're sitting around that 10 megajoules per day. So as I said, if you've got plenty of dry pasture, plenty of flag leaf and a little bit of grain in a stubble, you are likely to potentially meet that requirement of maintenance. But what we see as we go through the months of next year, for an autumn winter lambing, you start to have that steep sort of rise in energy demand. So we've got at the bottom there your singles, going up to nearly 15 megajoules per day at the point of lambing, and your twins are more like 18 megajoules per day at the point of lambing. So when we talk supplementary feeding, depending on your joining, a lot of people joining in December or early January, you're going to have that sharp rise in energy potentially before we get a break next year. So that's what we're looking at, satisfying with your supplementary feeding programs. But also we need to look at which class of stock go into which paddocks, because that's probably where I see a lot of mistakes being made, that, different requirements within your classes of stock, we need to make sure we're allocating the right paddocks to the right stock as well over summer. So you can get these varying charts online. So this one's come out of GrazFed. I think it's available on the Making More from Sheep website. But we've got there the energy requirements. So, they've got some quite small ewes, probably more commonly in South Australia from Merino, we're around that 60 kilos or plus. So what we see there is that maintenance requirement of just under 10 megajoules per day if they're grazing. They also do have a line there for your confinement fed stock. So that's why when we talk on confinement feeding, often once you get to those lower ground cover targets, it can be worth locking stock up just because they're saving a lot of energy not walking around those bare paddocks too. So, quantifying probably 2 meg, but in some cases in large paddocks, they'll be using a lot more energy walking round and round trying to find feed that's basically not there. And as you see there, we've got sort of during mid-pregnancy and then during lactation, you've got that real sharp rise in energy as we showed on the graph. And also protein-wise, you can see there your weaners have that much larger protein requirement. So I work on probably 15% protein for a 30 to 40 kilo lamb, where a ewe at maintenance is only needing, 8% protein or less is fine. So that's where we looking at what's out there and what's going to suit which animals. And so what I look at with ewes as well is basically you've got all these different types of stock out there. So you might have some young ewes, some maidens that are coming in for their first joining that, you know, after a tough season, they might be coming in a little bit behind the 8 ball. Or you might have had ewes that struggled a bit through lactation this year that, you know, I've seen on a lot of places they could be half to a score under where your target's likely to be. So when we quantify what's in those paddocks, it's important to split stock up based on condition score, work out who needs the higher quality stubbles or the higher quality dry feed, who might need supplementing early. And then you might have these big fat old girls that have done quite well last year that potentially don't need as high a value feed. So we need to sort of sort our stocking class of what they're actually requiring and then allocate paddocks based on that. And also young growing stock. So, you know, your ewe lamb replacements, your wether lambs, if you've held on to them, looking at, you know, your bean stubbles, your higher protein feeds, they're going to be better for those class of stock first. So I'll just go through just some quality sort of assessment of, you know, how do we harvest some high quality feed for supplementation. So I'll go through some examples of what we've seen this year. Obviously a bit late to do a plan for this year. You know, most of the silage and hay is just in the shed or, you know, some hay still coming into the shed. So, you know, in contrast to last year, we've seen some really good results with hay and roughage quality this year, but I'll step you through some of those as well. So just going back to what's happening with your feed quality. So what we look at in, you know, around September is we've got that really high quality, high digestible feed. So you're often still in that 70% plus in digestibility. I think last season is a really good example of what happens when hay's cut too late. And obviously it got a heap of water, moisture on a lot of the hay last year. But what we find when fodder's cut too late is you start to get that fibre level going up. So when you look at your NDF level, that's the structural components of the plant. So as the plant matures, you'll start to get a lot more structure holding it together, and that's your fibre level will start to go up on that plant. And then also your digestibility starts to drop off. So as I said earlier, that point of flowering is a real turning point of your digestibility and energy starting to drop. So last year, we were sort of in that range of, you know, often a lot of hay was only 7 to 8 megajoules of energy, also not helped by having a lot of rain on it. And the fibre levels were very high. So often straw is, say, 70% NDF level, and a lot of the hays last year were in that 65 to 70% NDF range. This year, you know, was a very dry September, not ideal for pasture growth, but as far as hay cutting, we've actually had a pretty straight run. And when we talk supplementary feeding over the coming summer, it is really a positive. So I've just got an example. I've just started testing a lot of hay over the last sort of 4 weeks. And they're all coming out. I have not seen a bad hay cut yet. So this is your cereal hay. This is an oaten hay, just in the northern part of the mid-north. So what we look at on a feed test is we'll look first at that crude protein percent. So your cereal hay, I've probably seen variation of sort of 9 to 11% in protein. So this one's actually very high in protein compared to a lot that I've seen, but a really good protein level at 11%. So remember I said, you know, a dry ewe for maintenance probably only needs around 8%. You know, towards the end of pregnancy, they're needing that 12%. So this is a really good hay to supplement to pregnant ewes. Your NDF level there, so you can see that written as your neutral detergent fibre, that's at 51% of dry matter. So as I said last year, I didn't see a lot under, definitely nothing under 60%. Quite a lot of the hays were 65% plus. Once you start to get over 50% NDF and as it goes up, it has a real impact on intakes, especially with pregnant ewes. So what we're going to find this year is ewes will be able to eat a lot more of this hay. Early in pregnancy, they're probably going to get almost too fat on this good quality hay. If you've got some of last year's hay, you could probably use it up earlier in gestation. But as they're getting towards lambing, you know, you're going to have a lot more chance of holding sort of single bearing ewes on this sort of hay because their intakes are going to be a lot higher due to the lower NDF. So 51% is a really good level. And then energy-wise, so we then look at digestibility, which on this hay we've got the digestibility shown here is nearly 69%. So that's a really good quality hay cut at a perfect time. And that's given us energy value of 10.2 megajoules per kilo dry matter. So that means every kilogram the ewes are eating of actual dry matter, they're going to get that 10.2. So, you know, under a kilo, just around a kilo of hay, you're going to be able to maintain a 60 kilo ewe. So that's typical. I haven't seen many hays under 9 meg of energy this year. So going to be really handy with grain prices going into summer. So I've got here a vetch silage, which I've had a lot more clients sort of going into harvesting silage. This year probably hasn't shown up as much just because we've had such a great hay cutting season as far as it's been quite dry and easy to get that hay at the correct time. But in a tough hay year, silage is a brilliant option to allow you to conserve high quality fodder. So doing silage means you're not waiting for it to dry out or mature, but you can cut it at the perfect time for digestibility. So this silage, brilliant protein, 23.6%. A lot of your legume hays, so your vetch hays and lucerne hays will be that 18 to 20% protein as well. So they can be a really good option for increasing protein or to young stock. But the difference here with this silage is we've only got 41.8% NDF. So that fibre level's much lower. Digestibility is really good at just over 70%, which is giving us 10.6 megs of energy. So, you know, you could lamb a twin bearing ewe on that silage. And we look at grain as well. We've got all these varying grain test results. So we've got all your dry matter there, which sits around about 90%. We've got your different energy values, which are just averages. So, you know, a lot of your barley and wheats, you know, 12 or even 13 megs of energy. Your lupins will be around 12. Oats sometimes a bit lower, depending on variety. And then we've also got those real varying protein levels. So as I said, depending on what you're looking for. So if you're looking at, say, maintaining ewes, you know, your barley, oats can work quite well. Where if you're looking at growing out stock, you're needing that extra protein in your legume grains like your lupins, peas and beans. So you can get these sort of average grain values, or we'll talk in a sec about feed testing our own. Yeah, when we talk about, you know, making a supplementary feed plan, I want you guys to look at what tools you do have in your toolbox. So one of the first one is feed testing. I use Feed Test, which is in Werribee in Victoria. They send you a bag basically that you basically just fill it up with your hay, preferably cord or your grain, and you can straight away get those results back. So encouraging any of you guys that are buying in fodder as well, make sure you get a feed test with it. Because you could be buying, you know, pretty average hay like we had last year, or you could be buying high quality hay and it's often listed at the same price. The next thing is condition scoring. So as I said, working out those classes of stock and who needs what, a lot of it comes back to condition scoring. So working out where your ewe flock's sitting now with a lot of you coming up to joining is critical, and whether there's any mobs that are behind. And the last one is the target. So once you've got your condition scores of your mobs, looking at, you know, especially with the kilos, price per kilo of lamb, what is your condition score target at joining? So, you know, often I'll go for 4, but this year with the cost of feed, the season and, you know, potential price per kilo, we may not push ewes quite as hard. So we might be looking at, say, just a 3.5 condition score at joining. But having those targets in your head as well of what you're actually aiming, where you're aiming to get your stock when. So when we look at all those different types of feed and what's available on your farm or what you can purchase in at a price, the important thing for you guys to work out also is what you actually need. So when I look at supplement and production targets for stock, you know, you'll see with a mature ewe that's tracking at, say, condition score 3, and we want to boost them up to 3.5 by joining in, say, 8 weeks' time, they're potentially going to need energy. So it's the energy that's the shortfall there of their system, especially if they're grazing a you know, a hay stubble with not a lot of grain, or a dry pasture. But when we look at a growing lamb on those sort of feeds, often it could be protein that's the minimum resource. So we look at them, they're needing protein. So I want you guys to look at each class of stock, what your targets are, and then look at what the minimum resource is that you need and how much you need to sort of hit those production targets. You're going to jump in, Penny?
Yeah, there's been a few questions pop up, so
Yeah.
it's probably a good spot just to have a little pause. So I've seen one came through earlier. How is the best way to class your livestock? So I think it was around when you were talking about maybe some ewes that were on the lighter side compared to the ones that were a little bit, bigger.
Yeah. So yeah, I really think the condition scoring is the best way to class up stock. So it is unfortunate. I think a lot of people have got these great weighing setups now that you can run through stock quite quickly. But unfortunately, you've just got that huge variation of weight within a condition score. And so, you know, you will get a smaller frame ewe that might weigh less, but she actually is still fat. So, you know, condition scoring 50 in each mob takes a very short amount of time, can give you an average. I use the LTEM app, Lifetime Ewe app, which anyone can download, whether you've done the course or not. And you'll actually get a percentage that, say, might be under 3. So if I've gone through a mob of, say, mature ewes and there's 30% under 3, I'd likely split the skinnies off and put them on a better paddock, or maybe with your maiden ewes that might need a bit more boosting. And then I'd put the fatter ones onto a different paddock. So, yeah, I'd literally just split them on condition score. You know, often ewes, if you've weaned at the same time, will be quite consistent at this time of year. So you'd just have an average condition score per mob and work out who needs which paddock based on that.
Yeah. Yep. Cool. Thank you. And the other one was regarding, you mentioned the feed test company that you use.
Yeah.
What's the average cost for a feed test?
Yeah, so it's around $60 plus GST for a feed test. So that's your hay, grains, any of your standard sort of feeds. I also do plants. If you're throwing pastoral plants and things into a bag, you need to do a different type of feed test, which is more like $150. But for your standard supplementary feed, it's $60.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't encourage you enough. I test straw, hay, silage. I like to have everything on the farm tested. It's the most accurate way to do a feed budget, which we'll touch on later on.
It's all about the information that you make decisions on, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There hasn't been another one pop in the chat box or question and answer box. So Deb, we might just keep moving.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you. And yeah, as Penny said earlier, whack some questions in that I can answer at the end if you've got anything else as we go through. So when we look at cost of supplement, this is probably the thing that changes the most year to year, is that we've got these just real varying costs of feed. So as I said, the hay quality was pretty average last year. And, you know, price was probably a lot less than what we're looking at this year. And, you know, grain price really we're seeing kick as well. So, you know, there is a lot of discussion about the potential return this year based on the cost we're going to have of feeding. It is pretty easy just to put these numbers on a page and literally do a mathematical calculation of what it's all going to cost. When we look at cost of supplement, you can do the maths easily yourself, but I find this feed cost calculator really brilliant just to work out your cost of supplement yourself. So basically it allows you, it's on the New South Wales DPI website. I've got the link there, or you can just Google New South Wales feed cost calculator. Basically, we have barley. I've put in at $3.20 a tonne, which is what I'm sort of looking at it maybe sitting at the moment. You can put in your nutritional spec. So if you had a feed test, you'd put in your actual spec. I've just done an average, so we're looking at 13 megajoules per energy, 11% protein. I've compared it to some good quality cereal hay, which cereal hay looks like it's going to be around that $300 a tonne too. So it's really up there in price this year. 10 megajoules of energy, 8% protein. And then I'm comparing it to lupins. Not too sure what lupin price might be once we go through harvest on the West Coast. But I'm working on around $4.50 a tonne. It potentially will be higher. 13 meg of energy again and 32% protein. So remember I said you've got to look at what you're needing. So if you're needing energy, if you look at those right-hand columns, this will actually spit back your cost per cents per megajoule of energy. And as you can see there, the barley is the cheaper option there. So often we think, oh, barley price has gone through the roof. But because it does deliver so much energy, often it can be a cheaper alternative to hay, just because of the extra energy you're getting per kilo. So that's 2.74 cents per megajoule. Feeding cereal hay for energy is going to give you 3.3 cents per megajoule. And if you're using a legume for energy, often it's a very expensive way of supplementing energy if you're not needing protein. So that comes at 3.8 cents per megajoule of energy. Now, in comparison, if we're looking to, say, feed some lambs and we're needing a bit of protein on, say, a cereal stubble that's a bit deficient, you can see there per unit of protein, your lupins are $1.56 per kilo of protein. Your cereal hay is the most expensive there at over $4, and your barley's $3. So the lupins are going to be much cheaper, even though per tonne they're expensive. They're just giving you over 3 times the protein of those other feeds. So that'll spit out really quickly the most economical way to provide the nutrient you're needing. Or, yeah, if you've got someone helping with your feed budgeting, I sort of go through that with all the feeds on people's farms, and we're working out the least cost way to basically supply what the animals are needing. So the thing that always comes in over summer is urea products. So we actually can look at a urea product just in a cents per unit of protein as well. So when we look at urea, it's basically a non-protein nitrogen. So remember when I talked about that dry pasture or those stubbles without too much grain left, you've got that really high fibre feed, you've got those stock, basically the ruminants trying to break down this feed. It'll get down to sort of 5% protein, which is well below minimum requirement, and it will be that 6 megajoules of energy. The problem is they'll stop consuming more because their system's just working so hard to try and digest what's going through the rumen. And the rumen bugs that help break down that feed will basically be deficient in protein, so they'll stop breaking it down. So what urea does, it's a non-protein nitrogen source. It'll basically feed those rumen bugs, and it will allow them to digest a little bit more feed. So when we look at dry feed, it will help them digest sort of an extra 10 to 15% in a day. So they will intake more, they'll get a lot more energy out of that. But, you know, there's a limitation to what urea can do. So when you look at these U's here on the left, you know, if you've got plenty of bulk dry feed and you're just needing them to utilise a little bit more, urea is the perfect product for those stock. When you look at those nice growing lambs on the right, you know, if they're getting 6% protein and they need 14 or 15% protein, urea is not going to help you get across the line. So I wouldn't recommend supplementing. Those animals, I'd look at maybe giving them half a kilo of lupins a day. You're going to get a much better result than with that urea supplement. So it goes back to what we discussed earlier. What does the animal need? Is it a slight deficiency, or do they need a lot of protein? Then we need to look at a feed supplement rather than urea. So when we talk feed budgeting, unfortunately, I'm not just going to whip out a feed budget for all of you guys today. It is quite a complex discussion, but I wanted to go through the steps I'd work through with a client to work out a feed budget. If you guys have got good experience of what's in the paddock, animal requirements, you've done Lifetime You or a relevant sort of course that helps you work out these sort of things, you will be able to do your own feed budget. Otherwise, there's plenty of people around to help you through that if you need it. But I like it at this time of year because we can work out total hay forecast, total grain forecast. If you're not growing your own, you can actually buy early. As you guys know, by the end of the season, the prices always go through the roof. So, you know, buying high quality fodder early, so you've got what you need in the shed or silos till the break of seasons, is the best way to go. So the first thing we need to look at is a class of stock, what their nutritional requirements are, and the numbers that you've got of each class of stock. So that's critical, you know, to put down on a piece of paper basically over the next 4 or 5 months. What your options are to supply nutrients. So within your region, you know, hay, silage, grain, And then you can step through that calculator and work out the most economical supplement. What is your predicted time of supplementation? And that's probably where I do use some of those BOM long range forecasts. Like now, I unfortunately am going through to May or later, really. Whenever that breaker season is likely to be, we'll do a full feed budget through to then. And then we work it through to total quantity per head for each mob. So I've got some examples. So we've got, say, 1,000 pregnant twin bearing ewes. They're needing at the moment, or sorry, this would be more like February or March next year, they're going to need 13 megajoules per day. So that's just in sort of mid-gestation. The hardest part about ewes is it's not a simple calculation for the next 5 months, because as you saw from that graph, every 10 days, basically their requirements changing. So, you know, we end up with quite a lot of different requirements, working out rations, working out quantities, and then adding it all together to work out what you need over the next 5-6 month period. So, you know, to satisfy that with the current feed qualities, I'm going to give them 1 kilo of hay and 400 grams of barley per day. So basically we just work out from the kilos of hay, they're getting around that 10 megajoules of energy with the high quality hay, which, as I said last year, they would have only got 6 or 7 megs out of the same quantity of hay, and they would have needed a lot more barley, where this year we're going to be in a better situation because we've got better quality hay and silage available. And then we're going to give them 400 grams of barley, giving us that extra 3 meg a day. And that's going to cost us 30 cents per day for the hay. So I put that in at the prices I put up before, which was $300 for hay and $320 for your barley, and 12.8 cents. So that's costing us nearly 43 cents per ewe per day to feed them at that point in time. The scary part is once you start to times this out. So I'm going to feed them that ration for 20 days before they're going to get closer to lambing and need some extra barley to boost their energy. So that's 20 kilos of hay per ewe for the 20 days, plus 8 kilos of barley. But once you times that by 1,000 ewes for that 20 days, we're needing 20 tonne of hay and 8 tonne of barley. So that's where your quantities start to really go through the roof. So yeah, sending back a feed budget can be quite scary when you look at the overall tonnage. But as I said, you're still better to forecast and make sure you've got it in the shed early rather than trying to buy more average feed at higher prices later in the season. I'll just step through one more. So when we look at 40 kilo lambs, so, you know, there's a lot of discussion around, I haven't really gone into it, but when you look at the cost per kilo of lamb return, you know, price is looking a little bit more positive earlier in the year. I've got some clients feeding lambs, buying in and feeding, some aren't at all. You know, there's a small amount of margin in it if you're doing the numbers, but obviously not as positive as some years with contracted prices going into early next year. But when we look at the 40 kilo lambs, or if you're holding your own weather lambs, they're needing that 13 meg of energy a day, around that 15% protein, because they're growing, they need that extra protein. When we look at 1,000 of them, so they have a totally different ration. They're going to have quite a low fibre ration because we're pushing them to grow. So they're only going to have 150 grams of straw a day. And then I'm going to give them, on average, over their 7-week feeding period, they're going to consume around 1.7 kilos of a barley lupin and feedlot additive mix. So it's 1.5 cents per day for the straw and 73 cents per day for that feedlot mix, gives us 74.5 cents per lamb per day to feed them. And that's a real production feeding, not just a maintenance or slow growth. So that's expecting them to grow at 300 to 350 grams per head per day. So over 49 days, we've got, you know, over 7 kilos of straw, 83 kilos of barley. And when we times that out by 1,000 lambs, that's a 7.35 tonne of straw and 83 tonne of your feedlot mix. So, you know, you can quickly do a bit of a cost of feeding there as well. And with your predicted growth forecast, you can work out what your dollar return will be. So that's what we're doing to work out which classes of stock we should feed. So I'm just going to touch on this briefly, and hopefully you guys have all listened to Cam Nicholson's decision-making webinar, which was the one presented last week. If you haven't, I encourage you to go back and have a listen to that. yeah, I've been stepping through decision matrices with people depending on the class of stock. So what we do is basically put in current value of the stock, and then we're trying to predict sort of future value. We're looking at, you know, especially for weather lambs, you know, there's been plenty of people making the decision to sell them as a store if you can get rid of them, just because you're basically going to keep that feed and those dry paddocks that, as we said, you know, we probably are 4 to 6 weeks ahead of where we want to be normally coming into summer. So we're looking at, you know, potentially keeping those feed paddocks for breeders rather than for lambs. But it's a real individual enterprise decision what you do there. So I sort of encourage you to step through for each mob of stock, current value, future value, what it's going to cost to get them there. So, you know, we need to look at the cost of feed, labour and effort required to either add value or hold each class of stock. So, you know, when you look at lambs, you know, potentially putting weight on and finishing a lamb, but, you know, potentially you might need those pens or feed to hold onto your ewes as well over this long period of time. So you need to step through those steps basically for each class of stock. And then when we look at valuable breeders, obviously with the prices taking a bit of a hit, you know, I've really gone back and looked at who are the valuable breeders on your farm. EID is really going to help this going forward. So, you know, if you've got these big fat dry ewes that you know have not had a lamb this year, and you're looking at consolidating your breeder numbers because you are going to be holding stock for a long period of time, go back over data if you've got it. Get rid of anything that hasn't had a lamb. You know, even by condition score, it's pretty apparent as you bring them through the race after weaning, which ones haven't actually put much energy into a lamb. So, you know, consolidate with the right animals, not just culling off based on a full age group because you need to reduce numbers. So, you know, nothing wrong with culling for age at the top end, but in the middle, I think make sure you've got a good group of valuable breeders that are likely to give you more lambs in the following season. So yeah, just encouraging you to step through for each mob and working out that you're actually keeping and feeding the right animals. So just finishing up, so the key take homes from today, I hope I've prompted you to sort of think about. I think I've given you probably a lot of questions, and encouraging you, I guess, to go find the resources if you're not sure how to do some of this. So I think Penny will touch on part of a SA Livestock Consulting group. There's lots of people scattered throughout the state that are independent consultants like myself. There's plenty of people in the commercial sector too that can help you with some of these things if you do need help. So I want you to first look at what feed quality you have in the paddock, but I want you to really look at how long it's likely to last. So, you know, are your stubbles going to get you through to March next year, or are you likely to be running out of feed by late January once you get back from the beach? So when you're doing your feed budget, that's the first question to answer. What do your stock need, and where should each mob go? So as I said, classing the stock based on requirements. So when we look at stubble grazing, you know, if we do have high quantities of grain in the stubble, I'll put all the young stock through first, you know, maybe only a week on each paddock, and then the older ewes will come through, skinny older ewes, and then after that, your fatter older ewes will come through next. What feed's available, and looking realistically at the most economical to supplement with. So it might be worth selling something that you've harvested yourself, and then buying something else in that's more economical. So it's not always what's on your farm, but it's looking what's available, what nutrients it delivers at what cost, and then encouraging you to do those feed budgets early. So how much feed do you need, and how long are you likely to be feeding it for to keep those classes of stock going and enable you to hit your targets on farm. But yeah, that's it from me. I think I've just gone a little bit over time, so I'll hand back to you, Penny.
That's all right, Deb. I think the information that you've shared today has been so valuable that if we run a little bit over time, we understand if people have to rush off, but we might just answer a few questions that have come through and take a little bit more time so we can, you know, make this webinar as valuable as possible. So one of the questions that came through, and we didn't really touch too much on additives other than sort of urea, but the cost benefits of additives such as loose licks, and how do you decide when they're necessary?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yeah, in the essence of time, I did take a little bit of the extra supplementation out. But as we said with urea, I think the cost benefit you can easily do on a urea lick. There's a lot of really good commercial products out there that'll deliver around that. They'll be around 10% urea. As I said, they will allow, if you've got a huge bulk of dry feed for use, for example, that 10 to 15% extra utilisation of that dry feed. So you can easily put sort of a megajoule quantity on what they're likely to get. So, you know, you can get a couple more meg a day off those dry paddocks. So probably a reasonable cost benefit in that when you put it on paper, depending on the price of the product you're buying. So there's plenty of different price points on urea-based products. When you look at other supplements, I really encourage you to look at what you're deficient in. So you can spend a lot of money on a lot of different things, supplying, say, microminerals in an area where you may not actually be deficient on microminerals. So coming into joining in coastal regions, microminerals potentially will make a difference. In other regions, you maybe don't need it. So it's looking at where your deficiencies lie. Calcium is absolutely critical over summer on stubbles. There's a lot of information around leading into pregnancy, just getting those stores back on the bones when you're supplementary feeding youth. So yeah, that's one where cost benefit of calcium supplementation when you're grain feeding actually pays off at lambing, that you're not having mortality.
Yeah, great.
But yeah, happy for anyone to contact me after on that, because I can't really answer it in this
No,
short amount of time, I don't think.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
So there's been another question come through. What are some good resources for producers, and where can they get some more information?
Yeah, so there's some really good dry times pieces of information around. So I might actually get Jody to jump in afterwards and tell us where the links are for some of those, or we can probably email some documentation out. But yeah, there's plenty of sort of dry time feed budget tables around, I think, on the Sheep Connect website. Yeah, that can help you sort of do your own feed budgeting. Or as I said, you know, there are commercial people working for commercial companies or independent consultants that can help you with that if you're stuck, really.
Yeah, I'd be happy in the email that sends out the recording and some follow-up to put some of those links in there.
Yeah, that'd be perfect, I think.
The people that have registered.
Yeah, thanks.
So that's pretty much all of the questions. I thank you so much for your time today, Deb.
Thank you.
I can see one of the things I wanted to ask you is where people can get in touch with you, but you've already shared your details there.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good way to end, making sure that people have access to people like yourself or the SA Livestock Consultants. It's really a really valuable service that you offer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Penny, for having me.
No worries. Yeah, so as Deb said earlier, we do have the partner organisations that we're involved with in this webinar series that have been really supportive of the content and getting the work together for producers. So the SA Livestock Consultants are one of those independent group of consultants who provide services to livestock industry across Australia, but more localised probably to South Australia. So you can find the resources available on the SA Livestock Consultants website. It's very worthwhile checking that out. And as also was referred to, the Sheep Connect SA is supporting the development of sheep industry in South Australia and is connecting people in the business of sheep. They've got a great resource on the Sheep Connect SA website. There's also plenty of social media channels that you can check them out, and that's really worthwhile too. And then finally, we haven't really touched too much on it, but AgX Alliance links up the farming systems groups across South Australia. I know Deb's heavily involved in a few, and these groups are really about supporting South Australia's broadacre communities by leading innovation and practice change through those grower groups. So if you are looking for a group of like-minded people to create a bit of a network with, if you haven't already been involved in a farming systems group in your area, have a look on that AgX Alliance website. It's certainly worth checking out what's going on in your region and who is doing what. Finally, I just want to also go through some other support services that are available that that are existing in South Australia. So the first one of those I will talk about is the PIRSA Family and Business Mentors, and I'll just get Sally on. So Sally is joining us from the Family and Business Mentors, so we call them FABs. They're a great resource here in South Australia that that helps people find ways to manage their unique situations and working closely with other service providers to connect you to those services. And we've got Sally, who is located in the southeast. Are you able to put your camera on there, Sally? Are you there?
Yep.
Oh, hi, Sally. Thank you so much. So I just your second little cameo on our webinar series. So I'd just like you to quickly share what you are doing as a FAB mentor with us.
So as you said, as a FAB mentor, family and business mentor, it's run by PIRSA, and there are mentors all over South Australia. And what they do is we listen and help people find the services that they need to help them with their unique situation. So it's a free service, independent and confidential for primary producers and also agricultural-based businesses. So if people need to know more, they can find the service on the PIRSA website.
Great, thanks so much, Sally. I think that's it's really important role that you play, and I've personally had experience working with you with groups of farmers, and I know the value that those participants in workshops and things have got from the FAB mentor role. So we're really grateful to have you online. Thanks. So the other service that I'd like to highlight is the Rural Business Support Services and Rural Financial Counsellors. So it's an organisation committed to building a profitable, sustainable and resilient rural sector by supporting businesses, farmers, landowners and communities in rural and regional South Australia. Most will be familiar with the work of the Rural Business Support and Rural Financial Services, but certainly worth having a look at what they do if you are in need. Also, the iFarm Well website has great resources. I wasn't as familiar with them, but I've gone through the modules now and seen how amazing the resource is and how targeted at what we do as producers. So certainly do go and have a look at all the different things there. And if you are in situations where you really want more support, more tailored and talking support, please contact Beyond Blue or Lifeline. There's plenty of different resources and services out there to help you get through. So thank you everyone again for your attendance today and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Don't forget that we do have the recordings available on the Livestock SA website and the Sheep Connect SA website. So please go back and watch those previous webinars. I think they all link in really well. The other thing is if you are having trouble and you do have an idea for what more information you might need, please reach out to us. We are open to whatever might support producers at this time to fill any gaps that you might recognise in yourself or other producers in your area. So please keep your mind open to what other opportunities there are. Finally, I do have to thank again our funding partners. So the Farm Business Resilience Project, which is jointly funded through the Australian Government Future Drought Fund and the Government of South Australia. The Ag Resilience Program is part of that, and we've been very grateful to be funded to do this webinar series. We will be sending out a short survey, and I will include some links from the Sheep Connect website around some of those resources that we were talking about today. And also, finally, keep an eye out for some upcoming events in your region. We're hoping to host some workshops in the new year that delves into a bit more detail around some of these issues. that we're or decisions or any of those things that you might be interested in. So thank you all again for joining today. I will say goodbye and thank you again